The following dialogue, written by Dr. Peter Haunowski, is an analysis and breakdown of an interview with the impostor. Some background. From a EWTN interview with Dr. Zugabi. Doctor, this is not about your credibility. How would you answer those people who claim that the person presented to you was not Sister Lucia? Dr. Zugabi. Such a claim would be totally preposterous. I will tell you why it was Sister Lucia. A number of years ago, I was asked, one time someone asked me, they said they had met Sister Lucia and wrote an article about Sister Lucia, a fellow by the name of Carlos Evaristo. He wrote several books over there, of sites in Fatima. He had written a letter to the chief of police and said that he had written an article about Sister Lucia, and had a picture of himself with her. He thought that it was not Sister Lucia. He wanted to know if the chief of police knew any forensic specialist who could compare that picture with known pictures of Sister Lucia. He came to me, and I went ahead and did a complete study, called an anthropomorphic study, of the photos showing that it was definitely the same person. I'm very, very familiar with what Sister Lucia looks like after looking at a whole big bunch of pictures. I know exactly what she looks like, in all ways. Dr. Haunowski. That Dr. Zugabi should tell us about this incident from the early 90s, was truly a godsend for the Sister Lucy truth investigation. Dr. Zugabi and Carlos Evaristo were two of the most prominent defenders of the identity of the false Sister Lucy in the late 90s and early 2000s. That Zugabi should admit that right after Evaristo interviewed Sister Lucy, he was so convinced that he had met an impostor, that he actually went to the Portuguese police to ask if they had investigated this, indicates clearly that the fraud was more than evident to him at this time. That the police should send him right to Zugabi, to solve a problem that no one took as a problem at that time, shows that there was, and is, a network of cover-up that seeks to silence word of what has become increasingly obvious. Evaristo saw and cried fraud, likewise, we see, and prove, and cry fraud. Is this dishonest? Now from an article by Dr. Haunowski. Why is an analysis of the 1992 to 1993 interviews important? We must give the most reasonable explanation for her contradictory statements because, if true, they change our entire understanding of Fatima. We document them here as extraordinary and undeniable evidence of how the post-1960 Sister Lucy's words contradict everything the pre-1960 Sister Lucy said. Until now there have been essentially two ways to look at these interviews. One either accepts them at face value or one doesn't. Most people in the mainstream church who have heard about these interviews accept their content at face value, like this. John Paul II's 1984 consecration was accepted by heaven, even if not satisfying every condition previously thought necessary. Mr. Evaristo, Dr. and Mrs. Zugabi and mainstream Catholics have accepted these points. Questions from Dr. Haunowski. We have three simple questions to pose to Mr. Carlos Evaristo. 1. Did you ask Dr. Frederick Zugabi to investigate whether or not the woman who met you in both 1992 and 1993 was the real Sister Lucy dos Santos of Fatima? 2. Was Dr. Zugabi telling the truth when he said, Carlos Evaristo came to me, and I went ahead and did a complete study? 3. Did you provide Dr. Zugabi with the pictures that he would use to authenticate the identity of Sister Lucy of Fatima? Did you provide him with any materials whatsoever to further his investigation? Now, a summary of Sister Lucy's points during the 1992 to 1993 interviews. As we have noted, in these interviews Sister Lucy contradicts almost everything that she had formerly said and makes many other bizarre statements. Here she introduces a completely novel understanding of the Fatima message from everything she wrote about formerly, but one that is complementary to the propaganda of the Vatican. 1. She denies that the third secret was supposed to be revealed in 1960 even though it was she herself, who had indicated that the secret ought to be revealed by 1960 or upon her death, whichever came first. 2. She states, in agreement with the Vatican, that the secret was intended only for the Pope, but he could have revealed it if he had wanted to. 3. She adds that she was opposed to its public revelation, in complete contradiction to everything that was stated by her and every bishop and theologian before 1960. 4. She declares that John Paul II's consecration of March 25, 1984, was valid even though it involved only a majority and not all Catholic bishops. 5. She claims that John Paul II's consecration avoided a nuclear war in 1985. 6. She says that Russia did not need to be mentioned explicitly by name in the consecration since the year 1929 had passed and the errors of Russia had already spread. These are striking contradictions for the seer who formerly complained over and over that Popes Pius XI and XII had not precisely followed the request of Our Lady in each particular step and detail. 7. She notes that Gorbachev was an instrument of God in the process of the conversion of Russia. 8. She clarifies that Our Lady never said the conversion of Russia would be to Catholicism nor even to Christianity. Rather, it would be a conversion from militant atheism to that of any country that respects the free will given to men by God, the freedom to choose between good and evil. 9. She also asserts that the annihilation of nations does not refer to actual nations or physical war, but a spiritual annihilation that was the result of atheistic communism. 10. In this interview, Sister Lucy also seems to know positively that heaven had accepted John Paul II's consecration of the world. Yet when asked in 1947 about Pius XII's 1942 consecration, Sister Lucy admitted she did not know whether heaven had accepted it because it had not been revealed to her. Yet at that time, she had not hesitated to add that Pius XII's 1942 consecration did not follow Our Lady's request exactly. Evaristo documents that Sister Lucy would repeat her certitude about John Paul II's consecration to Dr. and Mrs. Zugaby, who visited her in 2002, asking whether the consecration was completed. 11. Sister Lucy further claims in this interview that the conversion of Russia has concluded because of the end of atheistic communism. 12. Also, she explains that World War II was a war against the Jews, who continue to be a chosen people of God. This statement is very strange since Sister Lucy had never before spoken of the Jews, yet here she approvingly uses the precise phrase that was promoted by the liberals and modernists in support of Jewish ecumenism. 13. She states that we are in the third day of the Fatima week, which is ongoing. 14. Sister Lucy explicitly claims that the triumph of the Immaculate Heart has taken place. It began when Our Lady saved John Paul II's life in St. Peter's Square on May 13, 1981. 15. But, then she renders this triumph meaningless by adding that the triumph is an ongoing process. Ratzinger, as Benedict XVI, will contradict this statement in May 2010, by saying that the triumph of the Immaculate Heart has not yet occurred. 16. Lastly, Sister Lucy's closing message is, "He who is not with the Pope is not with God." In these two interviews, Sister Lucy contradicts nearly every statement she herself had made for the past 70 years regarding the details of Our Lady's requests at Fatima for the consecration of Russia as well as the details of the third secret. She offers a definitive interpretation of the Fatima message that is novel and yet agrees with the propaganda of the Vatican since the 1960s, which diluted Fatima to a benign call to prayer and penance that should avoid any vocal reference to Russia or its consecration. The message of Fatima, rather, is one of hope, peace, and ecumenism. Hence we see the astounding ramifications of these interviews. In his analysis of the two interviews, Christopher Ferrara sums up the force of the contradictions. What sort of Sister Lucy was it then, who could look upon the awful developments in Russia and the world since 1984, and see in them the fulfillment of the promises of Our Lady of Fatima? It was a Sister Lucy we had never known, a modernist Sister Lucy whose strange new words made a mockery of everything she had said before. It was a Sister Lucy sent to give us a new Fatima for the new church the modernists would have us believe emerged like a butterfly from a chrysalis at the Second Vatican Council. A new Fatima which heralds neither conversion nor triumph, but a pathetic accommodation to the worldly wisdom of a dying world. People now have an individual choice to remain as they are, or convert. A conversion of Russia without conversion to the Catholic faith. What an insult to Our Lady of Fatima. And what an infinite insult to him who sent her. False Friends of Fatima, page 78. Later on, Ferrara asks the million-dollar question regarding Sister Lucy's identity, and yet, gives the most bewildering response, a shrug of his shoulders. Was it Sister Lucy of Jesus, the last surviving Fatima seer, who spoke to Carlos Evaristo on October 11, 1992, and again on October 11, 1993? It does not matter. Despite the strange lack of interest in pursuing the truth of Sister Lucy's identity, Ferrara is ironically correct. It was indeed a Sister Lucy we had never known. Would Christopher Ferrara care to do an interview with Dr. Peter Haunowski regarding this topic? If so, please contact him through our website, sisterlucytruth.com, or at justicepc@yahoo.com.